I've talked a bit on this channel about just how impressed I am with Capcom's Resident Evil renaissance. It all started back in 2017 with Resident Evil 7, which was easily the biggest surprise for me of the entire last generation. Here I was thinking that they had milked all they could out of the action game Hollywood style and would now shift gears to the cheap scares, House of Horrors approach of viral hits like Outlast and Slender Man. The kind of thing tailor-made to elicit viral clips from big Twitch streamers, and in turn sell more copies by association. With that assumption in the back of my head, I was absolutely stunned when I realized what RE7 was. An intricately crafted Rubik's Cube of a game that masterfully combined both new and old. They tapped into elements of older games that have been lost over time. The idea of level design as a character, crafted spaces that feel eerily real, old-school puzzles, more methodical combat and inventory management, while leaving out the stuff that doesn't hold up today, like fixed camera angles and stop-and-shoot combat. At the same time, they gave us a scenario that was unlike anything that had come before and switched to a first-person perspective, a risky move that I think paid off beautifully. And of course, it was the introduction of the RE engine, a technical masterpiece that has been the bedrock of Capcom games since, and is one of my favorite in-house engines in use today. Then in 2019, we got RE2 Remake, which I thought was equally as impressive. It walked a very thin tightrope, managing to make something that works in a modern context without compromising on its roots. While I had a decent time with it, last year's RE3 remake was a misfire for sure, but that didn't deter me from getting excited for Village the second I saw it at the PS5 event. I was so excited that in preparation I replayed 7 and 4, the latter of which served as a massive inspiration for the development team. RE4 was an introduction to the franchise for myself and many others around my age, and it is no doubt a classic. My recent playthrough was the most fun I've had with a game since Doom Eternal last year. At the same time, it became a clear demarcation line between the horror-centric, puzzle-laden style the series started with, and the descent into, well, let's call it boulder-punching madness. It was an equal parts exciting and concerning thing to hear, but now I've finally played it for myself, so let me give you a rundown of my vacation in the Resident Evil Village. So here we are with Resident Evil Village, a direct continuation of Ethan Winter's story from RE7. In terms of aesthetics and lore, it's about as much of a departure as possible from 7. After being trapped in the Bayou Manor from hell, Ethan Winters now finds himself in a medieval European village populated by werewolves and vampires. The easy and, to me, expected thing to do would have been to make 7's narrative and characters sort of an isolated thing and move on to other stories that have a loosely connected tissue. Bringing Ethan back is, at least to me, a bold and unexpected move. In 7, he was a blank slate who didn't have much more to say than "Fuck you! Fuck you, fuck you!" And that was intentional. They wanted Ethan to be a random guy stuck in a crazy situation. A faceless protagonist in a first-person game where the player is meant to insert themselves. This is certainly not a groundbreaking idea. What is a bit wild is not only carrying him over, but bringing him into this drastically, almost comically different setting and making him the center of attention. After the scientific and relatively grounded explanation for the events of 7, this is the last thing I expected, and the game is all the better for it. Taking these characters from 7's more familiar, grounded setting and transplanting them into this bizarre Romanian village gives this a surreal atmosphere throughout.
The castle bell heralds danger. They're coming!
No, wait!
It immediately starts off with Chris Redfield and his Black Ops bullshit, Ethan and Mia's baby is stolen, and then right after all that, Ethan wanders into a medieval cult village with werewolves screaming in his face. I love this shit. 7, being the game it was, had to play things more safe and concise, but Village just does whatever the fuck it wants, and to great effect. This world is flamboyant, and many of its characters have a massive stage presence.
The mortal to House Dimitrescu. My daughters and I shall deliver to you the finest cuts of
Ugly!
this
I
slaughter.
want to see! He's awake!
Brother, shut the fuck up! What?
The village's inhabitants worship this enigmatic figure named Mother Miranda, who commands 4 family house heads, each with their own unique, seemingly supernatural abilities. Despite this ensemble cast of misfit freaks, the plot here is just as simple as 7. After Chris's raid, Miranda has abducted Ethan's infant daughter, but he'll do anything to get her back, and no amount of hand mutilation is going to stop him. The narrative makes the gameplay structure clear from the onset. Ethan is to tackle each of the 4 houses and then confront Mother Miranda herself. There are essentially 5 distinct areas, and Capcom have taken advantage of that to offer gameplay variety. The first house, Dimitrescu, is, no contest, the best section of the game in every regard. Internet fanfare aside, Lady Dimitrescu and her 3 daughters are utterly captivating. Their dialogue,
Stupid man thing!
their animations, just any time they are on screen doing anything is great, and contrasting their undeniable allure with the disgusting reality and physical threat of them feels like a very unique thing for a horror game to do and succeed with.
I haven't cut open a man in a while. Let me string you up, slice your jugular, and just watch.
And with them comes another character, the castle itself, which is a callback to the Baker Estate or the RE1 mansion. The main thing I loved about 7 and 2 Remake is how they brought back the feeling that many old games gave me of spaces being real and alive. Village triples down on that philosophy. The castle, along with many of the other indoor spaces in the game, feel almost too real, and the immersion factor that comes from experiencing them in first person is off the charts. The layout of the castle is excellent, and the puzzles here are rather interesting. They're more environmental, which contributes to the feel that this game gives you of being in a real place. If you haven't noticed by now, the game looks fucking incredible, and I didn't even play it on PC. Previous RE Engine titles looked great as well, but this is next level in terms of raw geometry and texture detail. Although its dark and cluttered setting distracted from it, 7 had more than a handful of rough textures and models. Village remedies the vast majority of that. Most everything is clean and sharp. These indoor areas are unbelievably good looking, at times looking almost pre-rendered. Gold-gilded walls, marble statues and floors, vaulted ceilings, and woodwork with intricate details. It's all phenomenal and convincing. I'd go as far as to say that, at least with the indoor areas, this has to be the best-looking multi-platform game ever made. The technical and artistic teams that worked on this shit deserve a Nobel Prize. I can't stress enough how impressive it can be. With its stunning visual appeal, labyrinthian gameplay structure, and foul yet captivating characters, the castle is easily Capcom's best work yet, and one of the most well-realized places I've ever visited in a game. The second house tackled is Beneviento, the creepy doll lady who was shown only in a few brief shots in the pre-release promotional material. As it would turn out, that was for a good reason. This is a complete departure from the castle, or anything else here for that matter. One thing that I found with Village is that it's not as scary as 7. Some of it is because the player is a little more empowered, but much of it is because this more fantastical setting is inherently less frightening, at least to me, than the more realistic environments and characters found in 7. Beneviento's house is a concentrated burst of horror and tension that comes off as being a response to that. Now this is definitely something that is easily ruined if you know too much, so I'll just give you the broad strokes here. It was almost certainly inspired by Silent Hill's PT, so imagine that mixed with the tension of trying to solve an elaborate puzzle, similar to Lucas's trap room from 7. It's the most creative section of the game, and while it won't hold up well in subsequent playthroughs, it's pretty creepy the first time around. After you're done sweating it out at House Beneviento, you'll head over to Moreau's Reservoir, which is the least creative and worst section of the game. Moreau himself, much like Beneviento, was largely shrouded in mystery leading up to release. What we did know was that he was a bloated amphibious blob with a mermaid sigil representing him. I was expecting to see some fucked up mermaid monsters, maybe a mind-bending underwater lab or something. In reality, it's just him, a formulaic two-part boss fight that feels like something out of Metro Exodus. Most of the level takes place outdoors, and outdoor areas are a weak point in this game. Simply being outside incurs a massive performance hit, and despite that, it doesn't look nearly as good as the indoor segments, and I don't think these areas play that well either. I understand that in the spirit of variety, they probably did this big outdoor chunk as an experiment, but I don't think it panned out at all, and that sucks because this is one of the 4 main sections of the game. And since we're already outside, let's talk about the titular village. The concept of the village is solid enough. It serves as a hub area between all the different family houses, and as you progress, more and more of it becomes accessible. It sounds good, but in practice, it's just okay. I do like that they included a few areas that are entirely optional, but I found the village itself to be largely boring. It just straight up doesn't look as good or feel as curated as the rest of the game. Fortunately, the final house, Heisenberg, is able to pick up a lot of the slack left behind by Moreau and the village. This section is split up into 2 parts, one being a blowout action segment, the other, while still combat heavy, is more like the castle. I'm pleasantly surprised that I was able to get this far without detailing combat, because it was a slight concern going in. When the dev team cited RE4 as being a major influence, I think many were concerned this would fall into the trap of becoming an action game first, at the expense of all the stuff that made 7 so compelling. Fortunately, that isn't the case. Village is still on the same wavelength as 7. Things are now slightly ramped up and sped up to compensate for the faster tempo of this game, which makes narrative sense since Ethan did survive the Baker estate, but I wouldn't say they've gone too far here. Aiming still has that off-kilter, imprecise feel. The amount of action is appropriate, and it's able to wind things down after big fights, rather than just ramping them up and up. The RE4 influence in terms of combat comes in 2 places, the Duke and the Heisenberg section. Duke will sell you weapons, as well as attachments for those weapons, and their stats can be leveled up. You pay for all this by selling him treasures, which are sometimes obtained by shooting at glimmering spots, and enemies drop coin. This is not just RE4 inspired, it is RE4.
Let me take this off.
Then Heisenberg's factory. It's home to enemies and encounters that are reminiscent of RE4's best moments, crossed with the unfolding level design of the castle. I don't want to ruin this one for you, but the main thrust of the area is a multi-level puzzle of an area centered around an elevator. The setting is equally cool. To go from a village to a medieval castle to this feels great. It's not quite as stunning as the castle, but it's almost as fun to play. It balances horror and action perfectly. At this point in the game, you're as powerful as you're going to get, you have a ton of bullets, but the encounters still feel stressful and desperate. Heisenberg himself is also a highlight. I love the voice acting, it's just a fun, lively performance, and his pronunciation is slightly off in this extremely enjoyable way.
Lady, supersized bitch. Ugly ass psycho doll. An emeronic freak.
So this is a great game then, right? Yes, it definitely is. It's a worthy follow-up to 7, but I'm afraid to say that the full story is a little more complicated. When I started working my way through the castle, I thought to myself, holy shit, this is gonna be a 10 out of 10. Then the first Dimitrescu daughter got whacked about 10 minutes after I first met her, which ended up being a bad omen of things to come. The Dimitrescu section ended just as it was getting into the swing of things, and the next 2 areas after that breeze right by like nothing. Pretty much every issue I have with the game, excluding the village itself, could have been fixed by having a longer runtime with more relaxed pacing. And why not? It's not as if what's there was fully explored. I don't feel like I got to spend enough time with any of the characters, especially Beneviento and Moreau. It's like those two barely exist, and I wasn't bored of the levels or even the combat. It just feels like so much potential was left on the table. What's the point of creating these compelling characters and this world if you're going to waste them on a game where they don't even get ample time to be explained? I beat the game in 8.5 hours, and I wasn't rushing. I did all of the side stuff that I ran into, and took my time exploring each of the areas. 8.5 hours is still longer than my first playthrough of RE7 or One Scenario in 2 Remake, and while I would have liked for those games to be longer as well, you can argue that they did everything they could and needed to do in their runtime. RE7, once you've broken it down, becomes a very short and small game, but in the moment, it feels longer and more satisfying than its playtime would suggest, probably due to its super intense and focused structure. Village felt short in the moment, which is a problem. The factory was the only part of the game that felt satisfying and fully explored, and in a game where time is at a premium, Moreau should have either been much more exciting or just outright cut to bulk up the other 3. I've seen a lot of discussion in the past few years that shorter games are better because people have lives or whatever. I can agree that a lot of games, like most mainstream open world titles, are artificially long to their own detriment. But my philosophy is more that the game should be the length that it needs to be. I'm not criticizing the length of Village because it doesn't meet some magical hour requirement I have, but because it's not long enough for what it is and what it's trying to do.
Get off of me!
Stay the fuck down!
Ethan! I gotta say, I'm surprised you made it this far. It'd be a shame if something happened to you now.
I don't want to leave you with the impression that I didn't enjoy my vacation in the Resident Evil Village. The game is immaculately polished and has the capacity to be absurdly good-looking, a true technical marvel. It also has the best characters and performances of any RE Engine game yet, and its gameplay design, while uneven at times, shows strokes of brilliance. It really does suck that length and pacing are my issues with the game. I don't have any of the problems with it that a lot of other people seem to have, such as the setting or lore not being true RE, or the first-person perspective being somehow incorrect. I think all of that stuff works well here, and I even love the completely off-the-rails, action-packed ending. So the verdict on Village is an 8 out of 10. It's a great game that I can easily recommend even if you're not a fan of Resident Evil or horror games. Both this and 7 will appeal to people who love old-school single-player FPS games, which are such a lost art these days. I only wish they had given this fantastic vision the room it needed to grow into something beyond just great. If you liked the video, a like is appreciated, and if you'd like to see more, a subscription is greatly appreciated. My Twitter is in the description. It's mostly junk posting and hardware pictures, a pretty pathetic little account, but with a healthy amount of follows if you are so inclined, it could become a lot more than that. Until next time, thanks for watching.